In this underground base, there were only 3 of us. Antu and I sat facing him. No matter what abilities we possessed, we couldn't possibly be the ones drooling on Tuyanbio's head. All 3 of us felt it was strange. We looked up together. What exactly was dripping that liquid down? The fire, fueled by scraps of wood from ammunition boxes, illuminated the immediate surroundings. In the distance, where the fire's light didn't reach, was still a silent pitch black area. Right above our heads, where the firelight and shadow met, an enormous human-like face protruded. This face was at least twice the size of a normal human face, white as if painted with powder, with a blank expression that showed neither joy nor anger. It had a hooked, hawkish nose, bloodshot eyes staring intently at the roasted bat meat in Tuyanbio's hand, and thick, coarse lips jutting forward. Its massive mouth hung open, a gaping black maw, with half of a bright red tongue hanging out, saliva continuously streaming down, dripping in drops and strings from above. The owner of that face had a very long neck, with dark, tough skin. The ceiling of the Jenna warehouse was very high, so its entire body was hidden in the darkness where the firelight couldn't reach. Only its face and a segment of its neck were visible. It seemed very interested in the roasted bat meat we were eating, intending to swoop down and snatch it, but it hesitated, apparently afraid of the blazing fire below. However, it seemed the allure of the roasted meat was too great for it. It could no longer control itself, and might lunge down from the ceiling at any moment. Was this a human or a monster? All 3 of us, looking up and seeing this, were both frightened and surprised. I didn't understand where this thing came from, but I could tell it craved the roasted bat meat. We had brought a total of 5 large bats into the cave. Antu and I each ate half a bat, while Tuyanbio ate a whole one by himself. 3 bats remained. Just then, Tuyanbio had cut up the leader bat into 3 portions, skewering one portion onto a bayonet and roasting it over the fire. However, at that moment, there wasn't much time for thought. I saw Tuyanbio frozen by the lifeless face above his head, so I quickly snatched the bayonet skewering the roasted bat meat from his hand, raised it towards the grotesque face, swung it half a circle, and then flung it forcefully aside. I threw it too hard, which ironically prevented the meat from flying far. Instead, it slipped off the bayonet and fell not too far from Antu's back. Before Antu could even turn to look, a massive beast from the ceiling jumped down, snatched the entire piece of bat meat into its mouth, and swallowed it whole without chewing. Thanks to the firelight, we saw it clearly. It was an animal, not a human. Its face resembled a baboon's, very human-like, with an extremely long neck. Its body shape and size were similar to a raccoon dog, but it wasn't clumsy and slow like one. Its body was slightly flattened, its hind limbs curved short and thick, while its front limbs were unusually long. When it moved, it could cling to cracks in the wall, hanging upside down. Observing its movements, it seemed more adept at climbing on walls than walking on the ground. Antu had never seen this animal before, but Tuyanbio and I had seen pictures of it in a zoo. The moment it revealed itself, we immediately recognized it. It was a prairie ground sloth. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Prairie ground sloths live in underground caves deep within the grasslands, mainly distributed in the grasslands of South America, Africa, and outer Mongolia. Though also ground sloths, they differ from forest-dwelling ground sloths and are even more distinct from their distant relatives, the tree sloths. Prairie ground sloths inherited more characteristics from their giant Ice Age ground sloth ancestors, possessing exceptionally large bodies. Their diet consists mainly of meat, and they are rarely active under sunlight, preferring to eat subterranean animals like large bats, mole, rats, or pythons. The prairie ground sloth's hunting method is stillness controls motion. It rarely attacks proactively. It simply lurks silently in the dark, not moving an inch, sometimes ambushing for days without eating or drinking. Only when an animal passes by does it suddenly open its mouth like lightning, swallowing its prey whole in one gulp. When the country was founded, African brotherly nations once gifted a prairie ground sloth to the Beijing Zoo, but it couldn't adapt to the Beijing environment and died not long after. I, Tuyanbio, and some old classmates went to Beijing for an assembly in the past. The Beijing Red Guards joined forces with us and took us sightseeing everywhere. When we visited the zoo, we saw the colossal cage housing the prairie ground sloth. The ground sloth in the cage had died, leaving only an empty cage. We found the massive, unused cage strange and paid closer attention. Pictures and an introduction to the animal were posted on it. Many years had passed, and the incident still left a deep impression on us, but none of us ever expected that in this deep underground Kwantung army base, we would encounter such a creature, and a particularly large one at that. It must have followed the pig-faced bats here. There were countless bats in this base. We had only seen one colony in a rock cave, and it contained thousands. This base stretched for tens of kilometers, and there might be several other colonies elsewhere. Ground sloths have thick, coarse skin and dense flesh, with many small bone fragments beneath the skin like wearing armor. When they mature, this armor solidifies and becomes impenetrable. Fierce pig-faced bats have sharp claws, capable of easily tearing the belly skin of buffalo and goats, but they cannot harm prairie ground sloths. Even if they manage to scratch it a few times, the sloth feels no pain or itch whatsoever. Here, it has no natural predators and an endless supply of pig-faced bats to hunt and eat. It truly has everything it could desire. However, it was unclear how such a large creature as the prairie ground sloth had managed to get into this underground base. It's possible that an earthquake or landslide created some large openings in the base, and it climbed in from there to hunt for food. If we could find that entrance, we might also be able to escape that way. The prairie ground sloth, after leaping from the ceiling and devouring the piece of roasted bat meat, extended its long tongue to lick around its mouth several times. Clearly, just one piece of meat like that couldn't fill its stomach. Moreover, it had ignited a raging hunger within it. The animal stared intently at the three of us, its intentions unknown. In this underground world, it was the undisputed overlord. In that moment of confrontation, my mind raced through several possibilities. The terrain of the base and dealing with wild beasts were somewhat unfamiliar to me. Should I strike first? The submachine gun was in my hand, but the destructive power of this Type 100 submachine gun was very limited. The skin and bones of the prairie ground sloth could withstand it. I shouldn't strike a snake but fail to kill it, only to be bitten by it, angering it without ensuring our escape. The Japanese Arisaka rifles had great penetrating power and could probably deal with the prairie ground sloth. The problem was we only carried bayonets. The two loaded rifles were some 20 to 30 meters away. Someone would need to distract the sloth for me to run and retrieve the guns. Running back and forth would take a short amount of time, but the prairie ground sloth was too close to us. Considering several options, none seemed certain. At this moment, Tuyanbio stood still and whispered to me, "Nyat, I remember this species only eats warm-blooded and cold-blooded animals, not human flesh. I think we'll be fine." With that, he lightly kicked several bat carcasses towards the sloth, signaling, "This meat is all yours, come and eat and don't bother us." Unexpectedly, the sloth didn't even glance at the dead bats. Instead, it stared intently at us, its drool continuously flowing. Tuyanbio turned his head and asked me, "Why isn't it eating the bat meat? Why is it staring at us so intently? It doesn't seem to have good intentions." I didn't dare to be distracted by talking to Tuyanbio. I closely watched every move of the prairie ground sloth. If it intended to attack, then I would have to rush forward, grab the submachine gun, and give it a few shots. Antu said, "We've all eaten quite a bit of bat meat. Could it be that it sees us as bats?" Before she could finish her sentence, the prairie ground sloth could no longer resist the rich aroma of the roasted bat meat. It began to approach us step by step. Wild animals primarily eat raw meat. Since birth, they have never tasted cooked meat. Once they have a bite, the taste of cooked meat becomes the greatest temptation for them. I noticed it moved very slowly and felt that fighting might not be necessary. Running away would be better. I called out to the other two, and all three of us turned and fled. We had only taken 2 steps when, at that exact moment, my foot caught on something hard, causing me to fall heavily, nearly shattering my knee. Tuyanbio and Antu also fell face first to the ground simultaneously. I found it strange. What had my foot caught on? When I fell, I glanced down and the ground was flat. There was nothing to trip over. Then I suddenly remembered. Only concerned with escaping, I forgot to bring the 2 children's bodies. Could it be mischievous ghosts? The prairie ground sloth had probably never encountered bipedal animals like humans before. It smelled the roasted bat meat on us, and already considered us bats. However, for now, it couldn't quite accept bats shaped like this, and it was also afraid of the firelight, so it didn't dare to advance rashly. It was contemplating how to swallow the 3 delicious prey that had presented themselves when it saw the 3 of us fall to the ground, and with a whoosh, it pounced towards us. Its hind limbs were both large and powerful. With one leap, it was right in front of Tuyanbio. Perhaps it saw this creature as having a lot of meat, and was preparing to bring Tuyanbio to its mouth to test its front teeth. Seeing this, Tuyanbio had to resist desperately. His hands fumbled wildly on the ground, searching for a weapon. Conveniently, the bayonet used for roasting bat meat was lying on the ground. Tuyanbio picked it up smoothly and stabbed the bayonet straight into the sloth's arm, plunging it in up to the hilt. The bayonet, having been on the fire for a long time, was like a red, hot iron rod. When it pierced the sloth, a foul burning smell immediately filled the air. This prairie ground sloth had been rampaging unchallenged in this underground base for a long time. It had never suffered such a disadvantage. Both in pain and enraged, it no longer dared to bite Tuyanbio. Instead, it slowly retreated a few steps, waiting for an opportunity to attack. Once the red, hot bayonet pierced the sloth, its temperature immediately dropped. The sloth's fresh blood made the blade smoke white with a hissing sound. Tuyanbio's successful strike was entirely due to the bayonet's heat. Otherwise, he fundamentally couldn't have wounded it. Taking advantage of the brief moment Tuyanbio repelled the sloth, Tu and I each carried one of the wrapped bodies of the 2 children on our backs, only hoping that these little imps wouldn't cause any more trouble. With the children's sacrificial bodies on my back, I bent down to pick up the submachine gun. I knew that the destructive power of this Type 100 submachine gun was far from enough to kill the sloth, but in critical moments, we could only rely on it to hold on for as long as possible. Before I could pull the bolt, a set of claws suddenly extended from the wall behind me and slammed down directly on top of my head. The strike was too fast and carried astonishing power. I didn't have time to duck, so I raised the gun in my hand to block it. The claws swept it aside, my grip wasn't firm, and the submachine gun flew far away, disappearing into the darkness where the firelight couldn't reach. It turned out that, unnoticed by anyone, 4 more prairie ground sloths had climbed down the wall. Too large, too small. Even the smallest one was as tall as an adult human. Clearly, they, like the first one, were attracted by the smell of roasted bat meat and had come looking for food. 5 prairie ground sloths surrounded the 3 of us. If even one leader charged, the others would follow, tearing us to pieces. Our only reliance at that moment was the bonfire. The 3 of us stood back, Tuyanbio holding the bayonet, Tu holding the submachine gun, and I was empty-handed. The bonfire, fueled by wooden planks, seemed to be weakening by the moment and would soon die out. At that point, we would surely become a delicious meal served on a platter for the prairie ground sloths. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but inwardly lament, just one was already a damn difficult opponent, and now look, the sloths in this underground base have brought out their entire family. Trapped in this desperate situation, how can we carve out a path to survival? Leaving things as they were was not an option. I picked up a burning log from the bonfire and brandished it towards the smallest sloth blocking our path. It was indeed frightened and flinched aside from the fire, creating a gap in the encirclement. The flame on the log was not large to begin with, and one swing nearly extinguished it. We dared not hesitate and rushed straight out. The drooling sloths paused for a moment, then collectively pounced. The submachine gun in Tu's hands continuously fired bursts of bullets. The leading sloth was hit, fresh blood splattering on its body, but they were covered in thick callous skin. Though the bullets lodged in their bodies, they couldn't penetrate the internal bone armor, which only enraged them further. They relentlessly pursued us, determined to swallow the 3 of us whole. Among the 3 of us, only Tu had a gun. Whenever she reloaded, Tuyanbio and I would brandish the burning log to block the sloths, preventing them from getting close. Fighting and retreating, unable to choose a direction during the breakout, we moved further and further away from where our weapons were, instead retreating back towards the iron door of the Jenna warehouse. Outside the iron door was the red serpent. We had originally intended to eat our fill, then carefully plan an escape through this iron door, but the sudden attack by the prairie ground sloths caught us off guard. We hastily fled back here. The flame on the log grew weaker and weaker, eventually leaving only a charred piece of wood with a few small embers, and our ammunition was also running low. The prairie ground sloths were enormous. Several clustered together looked like an insurmountable wall. If struck by their claws, the lightest injury would be torn tendons and broken bones. The sloth's encirclement gradually tightened, pushing us back to the iron door, with nowhere left to retreat. At this point, we had no choice but to rush out. Bio and I threw the log, still dotted with embers, at the sloths. And Tu swept the submachine gun across them in a burst of bullets, using her last bit of fighting capability to force the ground sloths back a few steps. Bio turned to open the locked iron door behind him, and I grabbed a black donkey hoof and flung it outside. Unexpectedly, the red serpent was no longer there. We didn't have much time to think, and quickly retreated into the tunnel on the other side of the iron door. Bio was about to close the iron door when a terrifying force slammed directly into it. The strength of these sloths was truly frightening. The three of us pushed with all our might, but we couldn't budge it. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind rushed past. I quickly dodged. It turned out the red serpent was still lurking nearby. The red serpent's intelligence index wasn't very high. It would pounce and bite whenever it smelled living creatures. The red serpent arrived instantly and silently, like a flash of lightning. If I hadn't experienced hundreds of battles and possessed extensive experience dealing with surprise enemy attacks, I would surely have been caught by it. I rolled to the ground, intending to get up and jump away, but the iron door was already rammed wide open, and the largest sloth, leading the charge, pounced forward. The prairie ground sloth, using its large, sturdy hind limbs like a giant frog, leaped out from the door, just hitting and knocking down the red serpent. The red serpent tumbled to the ground. Its body, unable to bend, immediately sprang back up, and its 10 claws, like 10 steel knives, stabbed into the sloth's chest. The ground sloth let out a roar, opening its mouth and biting wildly. After that, several other sloths poured out from the Jenna warehouse. Seeing their companion wounded, they swarmed forward to bite and tear at the red serpent. The smallest sloth had its head ripped off by the red serpent, while the red serpent itself was bitten tightly by 2 other sloths. Both sides were equally matched in strength, and they immediately became entangled in a fierce struggle. In a moment, large streaks of sloth blood splattered everywhere. On the walls, the ground, the iron door, and flesh flew around. Simultaneously, the red serpent also had an arm bitten off. We looked at the terrifying scene before our eyes, all secretly fearful. If the red serpent and the sloths had combined forces to attack, the 3 of us would surely have struggled to escape a death without burial. It was truly fortunate that our haphazard fleeing had unexpectedly led to a situation where 2 tigers fought each other. We couldn't miss this opportunity. We carried the children's bodies and ran towards the hole in the wall of the ancient tomb, wishing our parents had given us another pair of legs. We were as flustered as dogs at a family gathering and as panicked as fish caught in a net. There was no need to describe our messy and pathetic situation in detail. It was self-evident. The collapsed hole in the wall was still exactly as we had left it. We had originally escaped from here, and now we were running back to this very spot, completing a full circle. We hadn't found anything valuable, only encountered countless troubles, plus these 2 mercury-filled child corpses, which truly made us not know whether to laugh or cry. However, although there was nothing valuable in this underground base, there were quite a few weapons and uniforms, and perhaps even some generators could be found somewhere. Telling this story to everyone in the village would at least make our life, or death struggle with these monsters worthwhile. Now, we just needed to climb out of the hole we had dug outside, to escape. At this point, everyone's mental and physical strength had reached its limit, but when pushed to desperation like a cornered dog, facing utter despair awakens one's potential. And Tu fired 2 full magazines from her submachine gun into the coffin lid blocking the entrance, sending wood splinters flying. The coffin lid, which had been tightly affixed to the wall, was shattered in the middle by the bullets. Tuyanbio jumped up and hit it with his shoulder, breaking the coffin lid in 2. I pushed An Tu to climb up first, then joined forces with Tuyanbio to lift the 2 children's bodies. An Tu received them from above and then reached down to pull me out of the tomb. Finally, only Tuyanbio remained, as we needed to pull him up for him to climb. Just as he was about to ascend, 2 bloodied prairie ground sloths burst into the tomb chamber. They had become incredibly frenzied, roaring like thunder. Perhaps the remaining members of their family had all been killed by the red serpent. Although the red serpent was formidable, it certainly couldn't withstand the combined assault of the sloths, and had been bitten into mincemeat. The 2 injured prairie ground sloths, relentless in their pursuit, charged after us into the tomb chamber. Tuyanbio looked back and frantically tried to climb up, but the more he panicked, the harder it became. The sloths reached the hole, but luckily it was too small for them to squeeze through. The sloths continuously clawed at the dirt, trying to widen the opening to get out. Seeing the urgent situation, I quickly grabbed An Tu's submachine gun and threw it to Tuyanbio. Tuyanbio understood, fired a few shots to push back the 2 sloths clustered at the cave entrance, and then immediately aimed at the glazed dragon. Fire Pagoda's pinnacle, firing. The glazed tiles shattered, and bags of Western region's dragon. Fire oil spilled down, engulfing both the tomb chamber and the 2 prairie ground sloths in rising flames. At the same moment, An Tu and I exerted our last bit of strength to yank Tuyanbio out. Although we pulled him out in time, a large section of his trousers had been licked away by the flames. Tuyanbio kept slapping his butt to put out the fire, screaming in pain like a pig being slaughtered. An Tu quickly grabbed a water bottle and splashed it on the fire on his rear. His trousers were completely burned away, revealing his bare white buttocks. The loyal hunting dogs squatted beside them, watching their 3 masters emerge from the tomb chamber. It was already midday, and the sunlight was dazzling. I rubbed my eyes. Compared to the dark underground base, it was truly like 2 completely separate worlds. Tuyanbio, holding his butt with one hand, raised 2 pieces of jade he had taken from the tomb with the other, unable to restrain his poetic inspiration. He then recited a few famous lines from the World War epic poem. The fires of war have ceased, where has the smoke dissipated? O sun! Never before like today so warm and full, O sky! Never before like today so vast and blue, O smiles on the lips of young children, never before like today so sweet and bright. An Tu and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Have you ever seen a poet recite poetry while holding his butt? However, another unexpected event occurred, causing our smiles to instantly freeze.